So let's talk about World War I. It was a conflict so unbelievably brutal, it was called the War to End All Wars. But as we know, it didn't end war at all. Instead, it absolutely shattered empires, completely redrew the map of the world, and yeah, it tragically paved the way for an even deadlier century. Let's get into how it all happened. It's almost impossible to believe, but this entire global catastrophe, a war that would chew up millions of lives, was kicked off by a single act of violence, which really brings up the huge question. Well, to get that, you have to realize that Europe in 1914 was anything but peaceful. It was more like a giant powder keg, just simmering with old rivalries and tensions, just waiting for a match to be lit. Okay, so let's set the scene here. Before anyone even fired a shot, the major powers in Europe were already caught in this tangled mess of jealousy, ambition, and deep suspicion of each other. You can really see the fault lines here. You've got Britain, who ruled the seas, looking over its shoulder at Germany building a massive new navy. They saw that as a direct challenge. Then there's France, still furious about losing the Alsace-Lorraine region to Germany a few decades earlier and just desperate for payback. And over in the east, you have these two creaking empires, Austria-Hungary and Russia, both trying to dominate the super volatile Balkan region. It was basically a massive geopolitical chess game where every player was ready to make a move. So all these tensions hardened into two massive armed camps. On one side, you had the Triple Alliance, Germany, Austria, Hungary, and Italy. And on the other, the Triple Entente, France, Britain, and Russia. Now, the key thing to get here is that these weren't just friendly handshakes. No, they were military tripwires. An attack on one was considered an attack on all of them. It basically guaranteed that one little local dispute could explode into a full-blown continental war. And with the whole continent wired to blow, all it needed was that one single spark. And that spark came on a sunny day in Sarajevo. And just look at how fast everything spiraled out of control. It's truly breathtaking. The heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, is assassinated. That's the spark. Austria-Hungary, feeling tough because Germany gave them that infamous blank check, basically promising to back them no matter what, sends an impossible list of demands to Serbia. When Serbia can't agree to everything, boom, Austria-Hungary declares war. Russia, who sees itself as Serbia's big brother, starts getting its massive army ready. Well, that's a red line for Germany. So they declare war on Russia, and then just 2 days later on Russia's ally, France. All those tripwires we talked about, they all went off in about a month. You know, in the summer of 1914, everyone thought this would be a grand adventure. They were convinced the boys would be home by Christmas. Every army had a genius plan for a quick, decisive victory. Of course, the reality was going to be an absolute nightmare. And this was Germany's big plan, their secret to winning fast, the Schlieffen Plan. The thinking went like this. Russia is enormous. It'll take them forever to get their army ready. So we'll throw almost everything we have at France first, knock them out of the war by smashing through neutral Belgium, and then we'll pivot the whole army east to deal with the Russians. The whole thing relied on one thing and one thing only, speed. But the plan completely fell apart. It was a huge gamble, and it failed. The Belgians fought back way harder than anyone expected, which bought the Allies critical time. The British army showed up faster than the Germans planned for, and the French military miraculously rallied. At the First Battle of the Marne, just outside Paris, the German war machine was stopped dead in its tracks. And right there, that dream of a short, glorious war just died. So with neither side able to advance, they did the only thing they could. They dug in. And this created a massive, disgusting scar of trenches that stretched all the way from Switzerland to the sea. This was a totally new, totally horrific way to fight. To attack, you had to climb over the top of your trench and run into a hell on earth. Mud, barbed wire, and machine guns just mowing people down. It was a human meat grinder, and it was the perfect recipe for a bloody stalemate that would go on for years. So the war got bogged down in this unbelievably brutal grind. For years, millions of men were just thrown into these pointless, massive battles. But then, in 1917, a couple of huge events happened that would finally change everything. Man, the years 1915 and 16, they were just defined by this awful stalemate. You had these legendary, horrific battles like Verdun and the Somme, where over 1 million men became casualties. And for what? the front line barely moved an inch. The war got bigger, too. Italy jumped in on the Allied side, Bulgaria joined the Central Powers. People were introducing terrifying new weapons, like poison gas and even the first tanks. But nothing could break the deadlock. And you have to ask yourself, right? With this unimaginable slaughter happening on all sides, why did they keep fighting for so long? Why couldn't they just stop and make peace? While the sad truth is, their goals were just completely at odds. You see, the Central Powers, really driven by Germany, wanted to create a whole new order in Europe, with them in charge. And the Allies, they were just as determined to stop that from ever happening and make sure they were the ones calling the shots. There was just no middle ground. It was an all-or-nothing fight. For one side to win, the other had to be totally and completely beaten. And then came 1917, and the whole chessboard got flipped upside down. Two huge things happened. First, Russia just collapsed. It was torn apart by the communist revolution and chaos at home, and they dropped out of the war. But at almost the exact same time, Germany's policy of sinking any ship with its U-boats finally pushed the United States over the edge. America declared war, bringing its incredible industrial might and, crucially, fresh soldiers to the Allied side. So, with Russia out and America in, the stage was set for the final act of the war. And this chapter would end with the death of some of the world's oldest empires. Germany knew it was now or never. The clock was ticking. So they took all the troops they had on the Eastern Front, moved them west, and launched one last, gigantic, desperate gamble, the Spring Offensive of 1918. The whole idea was to break the Allied lines once and for all before the American army could arrive in huge numbers. And at first, it almost worked. But they just couldn't sustain it. They ran out of steam. The Allied counterattack, now powered by those fresh American troops, began the final push that would win the war. Before we talk about what happened next, we just have to stop for a second and take in the sheer human cost of this. We're talking about 8 million soldiers killed, millions and millions more wounded, countless civilians dead. The world had never, ever seen death and destruction on this scale before. And the war's end wasn't just a military defeat for the Central Powers. It was their total disintegration. 4 ancient, powerful empires, the Russian, the Austro-Hungarian, the Ottoman, and the German, they just ceased to exist, gone. And in their place, the map of Europe and the Middle East was completely redrawn. New countries were born, new borders were drawn, and tragically, new problems were created for the future. And the peace that came after was, well, it was a mess. The Treaty of Versailles especially put all the blame for the war squarely on Germany. It forced them to pay crippling amounts of money and give up huge chunks of territory. The goal was to make sure Germany could never start another war, but all those harsh terms really did was create a deep, burning resentment that would fester for years to come. And that really gets us to the most chilling legacy of the Great War. It didn't end all wars, not even close. By shattering the old world, leaving behind bitterness and economic ruin, it created the perfect storm of conditions that, just 20 years later, would drag the entire planet back into an even worse conflict. It makes you wonder, doesn't it? Was World War II just World War I Part 2?